Roberto Ragone, and I was just interviewed by the Keith Andrew Network, and I was pleased to be on it. He asked questions that were thought-provoking and actually the kinds of questions that I've been wanting to be asked at this period of time. So in my life, in my career, so they were very opportune questions that provoked a lot of enthusiasm, and I'll use an SAT word that ghosted me on the SAT, alacrity. There was a lot of, it prompted a lot of alacrity in me. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Keith Andrew on the Keith Andrew Network.
Please. It's Monday night, and you know what that means. The Keith Andrew Network presents a talk show host with a learning disability. I am your host, Keith Andrew. Our show is available on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and all social medias. Also, it's Monday night, and if you're a fan of WWE, only available on Netflix is WWE Monday Night Raw. We have a great guest. He already introduced himself. So the first subject we're going to talk about is icebreakers. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith, on the show. My name is Roberto Ragone. I'm from the 5 boroughs. I grew up in the Bronx. I used to work in government, politics, public policy, and during that time, I dabbled with theater. And then I made a full commitment to doing theater in 2013, and then moved towards more screen acting stuff in 2017, and then began to focus more on writing scripts for both theater and screen. And I've gotten several of my scripts produced, and including I had recently 2 years ago an Off-Broadway one-man show that I wrote and acted in. So that's a synopsis. That's a quick synopsis.
All right. Well, the first one I want to ask you is, what attracted you to start your acting career?
Yeah, what's interesting is that, where you have sort of little kernels of interest in your childhood that you might not even notice right away. I mean, some people, they know that's what they want to do, and then they're off to the races when they're, as child actors, or by the time they're in high school or in their 20s. In my case, I reflect on how I used to watch TV as a kid, a lot of reruns, and I used to ask, why did the actor deliver that line that way, or why did the writer write that line that way, or why did the director make that particular decision? But this was more calling kind of like as a pedestrian calling balls and strikes. But then, I even thought of like, I eventually even was emceeing events. And so that was kind of putting me on stage and writing what I would say as an MC. And then that all evolved into just taking a class that was meant to improve public speaking or conversational situations. And that person had a class on acting for non-actors. So I took that class, and then he would have people do a scene from some play in a gala format. So then I was on stage in front of audiences, not as an MC, but as an actor. And next thing you know, I was doing more and more theater acting. And like I said, then that evolved into a screen acting and writing. But that's how the trajectory began in childhood, more as a curiosity, as an outsider looking in, and then actually taking the plunge myself.
I'm a big professional wrestling fan, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, tonight's WWE Monday Night Raw, and sometimes Yes, you do start from the outside looking in. I always wanted to be a wrestler. I can't see without my glasses, but that doesn't mean I can't get into the entertainment world and get into professional wrestling in a different extension, right? I could be a ring announcer, I could be a timekeeper, I could work backstage. Hell, I could be a custodian. But just the fact you say you have the privilege of working as something that you grew up watching as a kid. It
Right.
doesn't matter if it is wrestling. Maybe it could be acting. It could be professional singing. We always start, every single person always starts on the outside looking in. And then when you finally get it, you grab that brass ring, you kind of look back and say, now I can see it from a different point of view.
Correct. In fact, I'll add. Let me add this: that even to tie in what you said about yourself, that the what a person can actually be a real aficionado in wrestling or boxing or something else, and then either offer their own personal commentary or moderate a panel, right? And sort of that was something I also did that I consider that very left brain analytical when you're sort of coming up with questions, and the questions are more on an academic level, or kind of intellectual, academic, logical, analytical level, where you could be analyzing either or discussing a historical event or a political event, or a person's technique for boxing or wrestling, right? Or even a what was definitive about the acting performances in Godfather 2 that make it a study, a perfect study for acting, right? Or what was innovative about Citizen Kane, right? That then introduced the future of filmmaking innovations to others, or Marlon Brando's acting. So yeah, I like to think about these things and then incorporate them into my own life, in developing my craft. So yeah, and then it becomes something that I apply. So, for instance, that I like to do comedies, and I like to write comedies and perform them. And I have a lot of comedies that I watched in my childhood that were reruns, and a lot of those reruns happened prior to the internet. So, for instance, a person in my childhood without the internet was inheriting reruns from two and a half generations before. So then what you could do is take all of that and consider that cultural literacy and make that part of the conversation between two actors, between the two characters in a story. So, for instance, I have a comedy called the Bromanceroni that I wrote, that I first performed on stage at the Midtown International Theater Festival in 2017, and it won Best Production. And then it made it into a film that is now on Tubi. It's Bromance dash Roni, where it's about two best friends, and it's called Romanceroni because Rice-A-Roni figures into the story. But the interesting thing about the two characters is I like to describe a lot of my comedies as an Italian-American combination of Woody Allen, Steinfeld, and The Odd Couple, with dashes of Abbott and Costello and Bugs Bunny, because of that kind of the mix between the intellectual exchanges between the characters. People who, for instance, are from the neighborhood, from the five boroughs, who grew up with front stoop culture, but then went on to college and got their degrees in liberal arts and became very culturally literate, but never really wanted to become part of the elite. So they still comport themselves with a front stoop essence when they like crack jokes at one another, and they might bring up Cicero or Paul Revere, or or something, any range of topics as part of the banter. And so that's that's very emblematic in the comedy of Romanceroni and a lot of the work that I'm writing. But what informed a lot of that is, again, watching those reruns so that there are these references that the characters make because they were aware of them watching it together. But then when they deliver those lines, even somebody who might be a Gen Y or a Gen Z end up getting the joke. You know what I mean? Or becoming curious about the joke. But there's enough kind of like there's enough banter. The dynamics of the banter at least brings about sort of a cheerfulness to an audience member that's watching it. Because I'm not promising stand-up comedy. I call it sit down. I call it sit down comedy because the purpose, sit down situational comedy. Because the point is for you to at least get rid of this call. For you to at least have a laugh, and you can go to the stand-up comedians to get the belly laugh. If you see the distinction I'm making.
Well, let me ask you this. This is an old subject that I actually got to bring back as part of acting. Let's talk about breaking the glass ceiling. With every acting role that you auditioned for, have you ever been stereotyped? And how did you shatter that glass ceiling?
That's a great question. It's a very good, but it's better than very good. It's a great question because I think there has been a problem, and you're asking an Italian American this question, which is a very interesting question to pose in this discussion. My big issue that I raised, that I was first educated on and then became more aware of as far back as the 90s, is that I think there had been a growing trend towards portraying many ethnic groups with a more balanced portrayal. So even if there were portrayals that were a bit stereotypical, there was always this effort to balance it out with the educated African American, the educated Latino. There's obviously Jewish Americans are portrayed in a wide range of ways, from the Catskill type of humor to the very educated professional. And I felt like there really wasn't that sort of balance with Italian Americans. And it's only starting to catch up now with shows like The Bear, right? Which my sister and my niece watch, right? And some other things, some other examples. So I attempt to help create that balance. So for instance, my comedies are an effort to make that balance, but in a comedic perspective, where you sort of like I try to use examples. Some of these shows are from the 90s, but let's say Paul Reiser was in a show called Mad About You, and he was a Jewish guy, but who had kind of that urban five borough shtick, right? Like you could almost sense that he grew up in a kind of an ethnic five borough environment, but at the same time, he was an educated, articulate guy. And I'm saying that kind of equivalent exists in the Italian community. So, but in terms of how that translated into my own career, what's interesting is that nobody, I have portrayed a range of characters, from doctors to, doctors at least 5 times, priests at least 5 times, CEOs at least 5 or 6 times, including a music producer, film producer, corporate finance producer. So people, I think, may pick me because there's that no nonsense, like I could pay that no nonsense, a New Yorker, and there's no there's no particular ethnic bent of that character, but it might be that New York bent that might have that person be selected for that role. But I'm also, again, I could be anything from the villain to what I've been trained many times is what I call, and what I think what's called in the industry is the mentor role. The mentor in the script is always the guy who kind of comes along temporarily or permanently to provide some kind of insight or direction to the main protagonist, right? So the protagonist needs help, needs guidance, and then somebody kind of comes along to provide that, and that could be me as a priest, as a bartender, as a best friend, as the dad, as interestingly, I've played the mysterious stranger twice coming along to provide advice. So at the end of the day, if you were to look at my IMDb credit, I may play a mob guy like 10% of the time, which to me is that's fine with me. And ironically, I have been cast in terms of that mob perspective. I have been cast as both the mob boss and also like the guy who doesn't do his due diligence and gets killed off right away. So that's always it's very interesting that I'm portrayed as this like this good guy in this other realm, and then this bad guy in the other realm, and then the bad guy could be anywhere from the person who's very shrewd and smart to the guy who's a total screw up, right? So I like that I can play those contrasts.
Well, let me ask you this. We talk about stereotyping, and some of it's funny. What I mean by funny is you can't take everything so goddamn personally. You have to laugh at stupid things. People, Italians make fun of Italians. Jewish people make fun of Jewish people. Disabled people make fun of disabled people.
Right.
And like George Carlin, in the words of the famous George Carlin, God rest his
Right.
soul, it's
Yes.
the context. It's how the joke is being delivered. If you're doing it in a joyful, funny way, then it's okay. But if you're doing it to be a complete shithead, then you're asking for punch in the face. But the reason I bring it up is there was a Italian. I think he portrayed or he was actually Italian. A wrestler from ECW named Widow Vito. Actually, Widow Vito or Nunzio. Do you like ECW?
I'm not familiar with that character. No.
And he was part of the group called the Full Blooded Italian.
Uh-huh.
And that goes under the whole stereotype. And there was an other wrestler who's one of my favorites, Native American Atonka. And he's like, he's Native American, so he'll come out dressed up. I thought it was funny, but there's a joke. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
So there's a joke at WrestleMania. I think it was WrestleMania 9, or it was during the 90s, a completely different time. Two of my favorite announcers. Reason I like the glasses is I wear them out of respect for Gorilla Monsoon, but I also dress up as Bobby the Brain Heenan. I try to have his mannerisms, but anyway, getting sidetracked. There's a part of the story where he won his match, and it's like, oh, he did Tonka. That's a really great name, a great athlete. And Bobby Heenan says, "Oh, did he grade him? Yes. Did he say hello? Yes. Did he go, hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya?"
Right.
Well, the point
So,
is, it's stupid funny. Of course, he apologized for it, but the reason I bring it up is you look at things from the early 90s, right? You look
right.
at things from the early 80s,
Right.
and people didn't, if you didn't sneeze the wrong way, you wouldn't
Right. I
offend
understand.
somebody.
Right.
So the question I want to ask you is, when did everyone become so damn sensitive?
No. But you know what? I agree with you, but I agree. Listen, let me tell you where we agree and where I need to reemphasize something that I said, because what you're saying is still what you're saying and what I'm saying are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
What I talked about, so for instance, I'm with you that I think it sounds like we both oppose cancel culture. It also sounds like that that the people are trying to raise the bar as to, or lower the bar as to the lower the threshold as to when they get offended, and therefore try to cause comedians particularly to self-censor. I oppose all that. I was trying to make a point because you asked me this question, and I said that relative to other groups, I said that if the criteria is balance, right? I felt like that the other groups were there was a movement and a conscientious movement towards balance from between the 90s and now, whereas you were more likely to see something gratuitously said about an Italian American in
Right.
some plot point that was, and I mean, I could give you a whole criteria for gratuitous as being, it's like that came out of left field. That's really, it was really an attempt to make a cheap joke. And I could give you examples, but I really don't want, I'm reluctant to do that in the podcast. But that is different. That is not mutually exclusive from the point that you are making, right? So I can agree with everything you're saying, but I also don't think it contradicts the point that I'm making. So let me just give you another example. Okay, so forget about comedy for a moment, right? Even though I do comedy, my one magnum opus project, my main project, is actually a drama, and it's based on a series of coincidences that occurred in my life beginning in college about a congressman named Vito Marcantonio, who was a congressman in Italian Harlem, which also included Puerto Ricans, Jewish, a Jewish community, and Caribbean Americans. And he was ahead of his time in the 1930s and 40s to fight for civil rights and racial harmony, fight for the underdog as a working guy, for working people. He was Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's protege. So he kept reoccurring in my life. And I finally met the professor whose book I read. A friend of mine from college had recommended this book, Vito Marcantonio, Radical Politician, 1902 to 1954. Then I got together with the professor. And then in 1998, we organized an event at NYU where about Marcantonio called Vito Marcantonio, a recognition and celebration. We did it at NYU because that was his alma mater, a law school. And at that point, I had been doing primarily academic presentations to teach people about this guy who, what I would say, if everything that you liked about Vito Marcantonio is everything you liked about Vito Corleone, but on the right side of the law, because he would see people every weekend to help them with do favors for them to make sure that the potholes got fixed and the rats got removed. And then he built a relationship with them so that he could take controversial positions, like being the only guy who voted in both houses of Congress who voted against the Korean War. So then eventually my professor friend, encouraged me to do dramatizations of his speeches. When we said we have to do more than that 1998 event, and we started to put a list together of things to do, what really resonated with me was the idea of doing a play and a film. So then that's the one thing that really launched me back into going into theater and eventually film, was if I could do only one topic, it would be him. So then in 2019, and now this is 2023, I eventually have the opportunity to do a one-man show, to do a one-man show called The Purgatory Trial of Vito Marcantonio. There is the playbill, right? That was equity approved. I'm supposed to, the protocol is to call it a legitimate equity-sanctioned off-Broadway show. And now I'm making a film version of that. But the point is that this is a positive portrayal of an Italian-American guy who is from the neighborhood, right? He hung out with the people. He did not become an elitist, right? He did not become, like go to the Algonquin and sip Rob Roy's, right? He just stayed with the people and fought for the people. And then most recently, I did hard to get this on camera, but I did a stage reading, right, of what's called these are stage reading from my full-length film script called Vito's Last Penance, the Vindication of Vito Marcantonio. And that was to raise money for the film version of the one-man show. So we did readings from my full-length script, stage readings, right? And scenes, and that gave everybody a tease, and everybody loved it, right? They want to do an encore, and they want to learn more about this guy. And African Americans even he was an advocate of African Americans, the territorial integrity of Puerto Rico. So a lot of African Americans say to me, "How come I never heard of this guy when I was in school?" So this is like the unsung heroes and the untold stories that really make my point that it's almost like the industry doesn't want to tell the positive stories, even if I could get just as much of a laugh as you about the stereotypes.
Right.
If you see my point, right? So that's my goal, and your show is actually, your well placed and relevant questions are giving me an opportunity to talk about all this. So thank you very much.
Those pictures that you did show, if you can send them over to me, they will definitely be on the screen for the video.
Okay, but great. Terrific.
I created the introduction with my song because I don't want to take time away from the guests. But for you, I make an exception. Unless I had $1 for every time I said that. But the reason I don't do my introduction, my speech in every single episode, I've been doing it for 12 and a half years. And I noticed, the show isn't about me, it's about the guests. But like I said, I make an exception. Whole point of my talk show is to show people that even with having a learning disability, I can sell them out to something. And at the same time,
absolutely.
At the same time, I'm able to turn myself into an example for people out there dealing with any types of learning disabilities and disabilities to never give up and prove people wrong. Prove to them that labels do not dictate who you are and who you're going to be. Just prove to them you can stand out to something. And as you watch the beginning of the show, I turned my speech into a song. So that's why I don't have to stop and then do the editing and all that. But we have 2 minutes left. I do have a couple questions for you off the air. But I want you to be brutally honest. When I first approached you to be a guest on my talk show, what made you say yes, and how do you feel now?
Well, I think that when you mentioned that you were, you brought up the disability, and I wanted to be encouraging of your endeavors. And then I saw like your format where with the other interviews where you have the wings behind you and the crown, and which should also motivate the people that you're appealing to as a model, because it's actually the whole setup is actually very cool in terms of you motivating other people. So yeah, I in the end I definitely took an interest in what you were doing, and I'm only finding out tonight now that you did this for what, 12 years? I had not.
12.5 years.
I had not. Yeah, I have not. I did not know that. So that's terrific. So people, I mean, if people want to know more about me, my Instagram is one way, Roberto, Roberto Ragone with the number 5, and my Facebook fan page, facebook.com/Reap-Ragone, Reap-Ragone, is a way to, you go to the video section and you see a lot of the videos of things that I've done. But I post a lot of clips on both Instagram and Facebook on the things that I'm doing. So I appreciate you letting me do this, and kudos to you for your endeavor in interviewing people, and also your interest in this sports arena.
No, absolutely. I do have a couple questions for you off the air. This episode will be shared on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Our goal is to reach 300 to 500 views. Once we reach your goal, we would definitely do a part 2. Once we do special events, you definitely will be a part of that. But if you're watching, leave a comment for me and our guests. We'd love to interact with you. And for our listeners, I just want to state for the record that, we talk about stereotyping, or not to go on a big rant about it, but I just want to say this for the record. You do not have to have a disability to be on the show. By being on the show, you're supporting a talk show host with a disability. But if you happen to have a disability and you're a professional singer, wrestler, anyone in the entertainment world, you're absolutely welcome to. Or even if you don't have a disability, you're welcome to. Absolutely. Now stay tuned for Off the Air. It was a real honor and privilege having you as a guest. I can't wait for part 2. Until we meet again, I'll catch you later. Thank you, and have a good night.
Joe, supporting me. My message is all that